Lone Rider here, and I wanted to talk about something completely different. A lightsaber, not a lightsaber like Luke or um, Rey has, but a um, a lightsaber. Um, and this is the Cold Steel training saber. They call it the Hutton Sabre. No doubt after Mr. Hutton, who wrote a fencing treatise on saber in the olden days. But the truth is that um, when people think Hutton saber, they usually think of the Hanwei Hutton saber, and it is interesting that they're both employing the same model name because there are some similarities that people have pointed out. Um, so this is just my first impressions review. I literally unboxed this about 10 minutes ago. And I've never had a saber. I have a blunt longsword. I have a rapier. I have some small sword simulators, stuff like that. I've never had a saber to practice with before. But when I was very young, my folks got me a actual antique saber from the war. We think it was from the war 1812. We're not sure. It's essentially a short curved saber, so it may actually be more properly considered a hanger. But it has a wide curved blade with a simple knuckle bow, ivory or bone grip, and then an eagle pommel. And it's in very rough shape because when I got it, I didn't know that you had to oil a sword before you hang it on the wall. So the blade's turned all dark, and it's not very pretty to look at anymore. But it is an actual sword that would have been, well, I mean, with a blade this wide and a curve like that, this wasn't worn for decoration. This was carried into battle. So I've always thought sabers were kind of cool, not just the kind used by uh, Luke. And this actually isn't representative of that type of saber necessarily. This is more representative, or supposed to be, I think, of a like a Victorian era saber. So something from, let's say, the mid 1800s rather than the late 1700s or the early 1800s. Those tended to be wider and more curved. Um, it's worth noting that this is more curved than some other military saber simulators, but um, or training sabers. But clearly, although I mean it's clearly curved, and people have said I have never handled a Hanwei Hutton, but people have said it's more curved than the Hanwei Hutton. I mean, if you look at it like this, that's clearly curved. Um, it isn't as curved as earlier period sabers are. In fact, it's not as curved as the historical example I have upstairs. Um, and it has a much later style of hilt. This back strap curving over and then grip wrapped with wire is indicative of a later period sword. Something like here in America, the 1840 or 1860 cavalry sabers, although I think the 1860 is a misnomer. I think the sword's from a later date. But you had the 1840 heavy cavalry saber, and then you had the one from the early 1860s. They call it, a lot of the reproductions, they call it 1860, but I think it was actually from later than that. I think it was like, 2 or 3 years later. But those are the ones with the 3 bar brass guards, very typical. If you've ever seen a Civil War movie, you've seen them, or even in some old westerns. And they had the same style of grip where it's like this with a back strap and then wrapped with wire. Um, and of course, a lot of the British swords as well um, from that period. The earlier periods tended to have not only grips without back straps, so sans backstrap, they also tended to have discrete pommels. I mean, the example of sword has a pommel that's shaped like a really pissed off looking eagle head. Whereas this just has a pommel cap that's often integrated into the backstrap, at least on these training swords. And real ones, frankly, tend to be integrated into the backstrap as well. It's just being a training sword, everything is kind of scaled down. The blade is lighter, the blade is flexible, it's thinner, um, and the guard doesn't have to be as thick. Although it's bigger, it affords more protection, but it's not as sturdy as you would expect the guard to be on an actual sword, because nobody's going to try and really chop through this. Although it is interesting, you would expect a slightly sturdier guard only because even though it's a practice sword and it's going to be getting hit with other practice swords, which are going to be lighter than combat sabers, it is going to be getting hit a lot. So, I mean, you would expect that they would use a more substantial guard. One of the criticisms, in fact, of the Hanwei Hutton is that the guards basically get bent out of shape, no pun intended, fairly quickly. This guard, it's worth noting, appears to have rolled edges. So it appears to be thicker on the edges for reinforcement, something that the Hanwei Hutton noticeably does not have. So the Cold Steel Hutton in that regard. And this is the Cold Steel Hutton Sabre. And it makes me feel weird to say that because I'm going to be honest, like a lot of people who are into swords, I really haven't heard great things about Cold Steel's products. Their knives might be fine, I don't know. But their swords, I've heard a lot of talk of problems. Swords that basically don't handle well because they're either too clunky or they're proportioned wrong. And in particular, I've heard a lot about hilts being loose or misaligned. Now, that wouldn't be a problem with this because it has a threaded handle. And in fact, I intend to put some Loctite on there, not the permanent kind, but the kind that just makes it a little tighter, a little less likely to back out. But that is a threaded pommel, very similar to some Hanwei swords. So if it does get loose, I can just tighten it. Also allows you to replace the hilt, or I could even make a knuckle bow if I wanted out of, let's say, much thicker, mild steel plate and just put it on. Wouldn't look as pretty, but who knows? So just a thought. But I did want to get one of these because I haven't had an actual saber, and I always thought sabers were kind of cool. And just my first impressions after swinging it around outside for a little bit after I opened it up and took the grease off. Well, there's a few things I want to get out of the way right away. They shipped the entire thing covered in grease, including the guard inside and out. Now, I can respect that if it was being shipped from, let's say, overseas. Okay, they want to make sure that in its long journey across the ocean, it doesn't rust or oxidize. So in a way, it's kind of great that it had this thick, oily substance all over it. On the other hand, I did have to wipe that off. None of the other swords I had, some of them might have had a thin coat of oil on the blade, but that was it, and very thin. This was almost excessively oiled. Again, it's easy enough to wipe off. I don't see a problem with that. And it's not parts that you're going to be touching. You really touch the handle when you use a sword like this. There's not really half swording in saber anyway, but that's good and bad. One, it's good because it allowed me to be pretty much guaranteed that the sword would arrive to me with no corrosion from being shipped across the world or wherever it came from. On the other hand, it did mean that I had to wipe off the sword before I could touch anything. And in fact, I was going to initially lay the sword down on a chair to pick up the packing material because the box that it came in, the Cold Steel box, was inside a shipping box, and in between the two was a giant pile of those styrofoam packing peanuts. I hate those things. I've ordered a few other things from Cult of Athena. Nothing else ever came with packing peanuts. I don't know why this one did. Maybe they just ran out of newspaper that day or something. But I hate packing peanuts. They get everywhere. They're a menace. They're just, so I was going to very carefully pick up the few that came out. And then I realized I couldn't lay the sword down in the box because, I couldn't lay the sword down in the chair because it would get the chair all greasy. It was a leather recliner. I was going to just lay the sword across it. Oh, shoot, I can't do that. So I took the sword into the bathroom and took some paper towels and wiped off the blade. And then I realized the handle was greasy, so I wiped that off. And then I realized the inside of the guard was greasy. But it's more or less clean now. I have to go over it. But so the two things I noticed from packing that I wanted to get out of the way is, one, it was shipped in styrofoam peanuts. So be careful when you open the box. And two, it was greased. So you should be guaranteed that your sword's not going to come with like any rust spots or pitting. On the flip side, don't handle it or let it touch your clothes or whatever, or furnishings in your home until you wipe all that grease off or oil off. It was really almost like thick oil or light grease. So there. Now the sword itself. I'm not a saber expert. Like I said, I have a long sword, a rapier, some small sword things. The only thing I've read Angelo's small sword treatise. I've read a little bit about other types of swords, but really the only thing I've ever attended HEMA classes in is the longsword. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure the one time a guy came to the HEMA club with small swords and taught like 2 hours of small sword doesn't count. So basically, the only thing I actually have any proper instruction is longsword, and I'm a noob at that. But I always thought these were kind of cool. Like I said, I always had the old one, and it was just kind of neat, the idea of getting one that I could practice with. Now, as far as the sword itself, again, keep in mind I'm not a sabreur. I was surprised how light the guard seems in terms of how thin it is. However, it is like rolled or reinforced around the edge, which helps. I was also actually kind of surprised that the sword is so light. It's definitely lighter than a longsword, but it's lighter than my rapier. I'm going to be honest. And I was surprised by how flexible the blade is, while at the same time being fairly stiff from about here down. And if you look at the back, it's not all that thick. There also is a fuller, which was a nice touch. And the fuller goes from about here, where my thumb is, to where the ricasso would end on a sword that had a ricasso. I guess you could say this whole thing is a ricasso because the blade's not sharp, it's blunt. Although there is a bit of profiling towards the edge, and then it just ends on a flat edge. So now you have a squared off and then slightly rounded tip, but the tip itself it's not a spatula tip, it's not rolled. I guess if I'm going to try sparring with this, I'm going to have to do something with that, because a tip like that, you could still injure somebody if you hit them hard. I mean, the blade will flex, but if it doesn't meet enough resistance first to cause it to flex before it goes in, then all that force gets transferred to the target, and you end up like this, which is no fun for anyone. I know a lot of people sometimes have to put blunts on the ends of these. I may look into something else. Perhaps I can actually, hammer it down and make it flare out a little, make it wider. I don't know. I got a friend my friend who runs the bike shop has access to brazing equipment. I might just try and braze something on there. We'll see. That might ruin the temper, but it's worth considering. Now the hilt, stylistically in terms of how it looks and design, except for the guard being slightly different, it's almost identical to the Hanwei Hutton. It's threaded and it has a back strap. The back strap is checkered here, where you'd put your thumb if you were doing the thumb up grip, and then it has a series of crossed checkering strands down there. Rolls around, makes your pommel. This gets inserted, and then the tang comes to about there, and then there's this nut that goes through both. Now the guard is perforated, which I like. A lot of the earlier ones of these, which came with scabbards, oddly enough, even though they're not sharp swords, it would have been nice to have that, just because it would look way cooler hanging on the wall with a scabbard, and it would sort of protect the blade. But whatever. I don't really need a scabbard. It's not like I'm going to be going to an officer's ball or something where I'm going to have to wear the sword. We don't really wear the swords in HEMA. We just practice with them. But I mean, it would have been nice to have, but mine didn't have it. But the ones that came with the scabbards didn't have perforated guards. The guards were basically identical from what I had seen, but they weren't perforated. So I don't know if this is a newer model or a change or what. I will say I think it looks pretty nice. The perforations aren't. I mean, it's kind of crude in a way, but it does look more interesting than it would if it was just plain. So, I'm not dead set against that. And in point of fact, the fact that it might be kind of crude looking, it's a training saber. It's going to get dinged up, I'm quite sure. But, as far as the feel in the hand, I mean, this is, as somebody who's not a sabreur, I don't really know what to think of it. Your point of balance is actually out there. let's see, that would be, according to my trusty ruler here, that would be about 5 inches from the guard. I don't think that's abnormal for historical sabers, at least from what I've heard other people who know more about sabers say. So, you know, I guess it should feel in the hand the way it should. Again, not being a sabreur, I can't vouch for that. What I can say is that the grip is skinny, and people have commented on this. They said the grip is very skinny. And I'm holding it like this. Now, with a sword like this, you would probably be using it with a thick glove. And I can actually test that if you hold on one second. Somewhere over here I have... Well, let's try the leather gloves first because they're right here. Okay. These are just light leather gloves. With a guard like this, I'm not sure... Well, I'm a noob, so I probably want something more like a lacrosse glove. But with a light leather glove, it actually doesn't feel... All of a sudden, the grip doesn't feel so skinny anymore. So even just something like this, like a lightly, you know, this is just a glove like you'd wear in the winter. It's leather, and then there's insulation, which in this case I'm using as padding. But of course, you know, I mean, it would still hurt to get hit wearing a glove like that. You don't want to. I guess if you were relying on the guard to protect you, this is more protective than a simple knuckle bow or a 3-bar hilt. However, as a noob to saber, I wouldn't count on just having a light glove. I would wear something like a lacrosse glove. Let's see if that fits. Rummaging around in here. Oh, here we go. Okay. It's a little bit awkward. This is the other hand, and I'm actually lefty, so I wouldn't be using this hand, but this was the glove that came out of the bag, out of the gear bag, so let's try this. All right, here we go. All right. So, it does fit. You can comfortably get your thumb in a thumb up position. It feels a little awkward, but you can do it. It feels more awkward for me because I have some nerve issues with my right hand. But you can do it. There's room. And you know, if you hold it in like a hammer fist grip, same thing. Now, there's not a lot of room. I wouldn't want a glove that's any bigger than this because you do kind of run out of space. But for something like a lacrosse glove like this or the Red Dragon gloves, you should be good. And again, I would be doing it lefty, so that's the wrong glove to use, but it's the one that came out of the gear bag. So one thing I did notice is without a glove on, either a leather glove or a lacrosse glove or anything else, just in the bare hand, because the handle is so tiny, there is a tendency for the thing to twist in your grip. Now, part of that might be I've never handled a saber like this before, but part of it may very well be the fact that the handle is so skinny. I think what helps is if you back your hand down and you do the thumb up grip like this. So this part of the handle where it's curved slightly is sitting in that crook of your palm there. And that I found helps keep the sword from twisting. But again, I've only had this for this afternoon. I swung it around for a little while. I will definitely have to put it through its paces, and there'll be a follow-up coming then. I have to say I'm impressed. Strange thing to say, I know it's Cold Steel, and Cold Steel doesn't get a good rap from sword people, but I guess what that illustrates is you always have to go by your own evaluation, not what other people say or whatever. First of all, there's some variations in the items. The fact that every review I saw of this online, they were showing one without a perforated guard, right there, that tells you something. And then the fact that a lot of the ones they were showing came with metal scabbards. Well, this doesn't have a scabbard, so clearly there's some variation between items or between generations of the item. Early models maybe and later ones. I am a little concerned that the bulk of the guard is still too thin. But like I said, it does have a ridge around the edge, and if need be, I could always make my own knuckle bow, and I don't see that as being a huge problem. Um, but the thing is, it's a curved practice saber blade. It's fairly inexpensive, and we'll see what happens with this. I am definitely looking forward to using it. Um, and I'll tell you right now, it's going to be interesting because every other sword I have, from the rapier through the longsword, is a straight blade. So, I mean, what I could see happening, and this actually did happen outside when I was trying to thrust the pole, I went like this, and I missed because the pole was over here and my point was over there. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when I'm actually trying to use a curved sword for the first time. But yeah, this is something I've always wanted to give a try ever since I got that antique one as a youngster, and it'd be nice to actually learn how to use that type of thing. I mean, considering I have a real one upstairs that was undoubtedly used in one of the conflicts, either in the 18th or early 19th centuries. Again, we don't know if it's American Revolutionary War or if it's from the Napoleonic period or the War of 1812. Not sure, but yeah. So I'm gonna give this thing a try and see what I can see. And I am surprised by how light it is. But again, even though it's fairly light, the point of balance is still 5 inches out. So we'll see what happens. The only criticism I have right now off the top is that the tip, could be blunter. This rounded tip, I would argue, is probably dangerous to spar with in its own, condition. And the grip being really thin this way. I don't think it necessarily has to be thicker this way, but I think if they could have had it, come down and then maybe swell out a little in the middle and then go back. As it is, it appears to just bow in like this. And maybe they were trying to give it a slight curve. You'll notice it's wider at the end than the bottom, and that's how a lot of them were. But the point is, a lot of them also had a little bit of a swell here, or at least were thicker here, and this one doesn't have that. So, again, I don't know if that's the same criticism is given to the Hanwei Sabre, and I don't know if that's because these things were designed with the idea that somebody was going to be using big clunky gloves, or if it was just an oversight on the part of the people making the sword, or a design choice for whatever reason. Maybe they all have small hands. I don't know. But so far, I do have to say, with the caveat about the point needing some kind of a blunt tip, and the grip being fairly thin in this plane, everything else I'm incredibly impressed with. I am a little concerned about the thinness of the guard in terms of durability, but I'm going to be honest, I'm a noob at HEMA, okay? I don't really do full force sparring anyway. Do we do drills? Yeah, but I don't, we don't do like full out, and I'm not sure that many people do. I mean, if you went full out, you'd really hurt somebody, even with the top level protective gear. So, as far as that goes, am I all that concerned about it getting? I'd be more concerned about it getting damaged if this was a peened hilt assembly. The fact that you can unscrew the nut and take the hilt off, that allays any fear I might have about what could happen to the guard. Because as long as the blade holds up, if the guard does get really prematurely beat up, I can always replace it. Or even, like I said, make my own. Just take some bar stock and whatever. It won't be as pretty, but it might be stronger. So there we go. That's the Cold Steel Hutton Sabre. And like I said, this is my first saber. I'm not a sabrewer, so anything I may have missed in this first impressions pseudo review, well, put it down to me not being a saber expert. But I am somebody who's always thought they were kind of cool, and I am looking forward to giving this a try. So, Lone Rider, out.